I mean, it was corporal punishment.
Yeah.
They would have to sit and stare at walls for hours. School was a joke. It was entirely about control and punishment.
Yeah, punishment and control.
And what's important to know is that this industry is still happening. Provo Canyon School is still open.
Still
Still
open.
accepting students.
Yeah. As young as 7 years old. Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
You are very welcome to our cornucopia of content coverage here on the YouTubes and the podcasts. We're doing a series of one-off videos here in between wrapping up The Pharmacist and moving on into The Dropout and Bridgerton. This is going to be a busy March and April, y'all. But today we're talking about the 2020 documentary, This is Paris, which is available for free to watch on Paris Hilton's YouTube channel because it is, in fact, about Paris Hilton. And this documentary, I was just thinking about this before we started filming. It's been on our list for longer than our interest in institutional abuse in terms of the troubled teen industry. Because we kind of fallen down this rabbit hole of like documentaries about teen pop stars. So we come from this from like a couple different angles. Because I know we put it on the list like once it came out because we had watched Miss Americana and then we had watched Framing Britney Spears and now obsessed with following the Britney Spears conservatorship as we were throughout all of 2021. But we bumped this up, I think, on the list of coverage after our aforementioned rabbit hole into the troubled teen industry as a facet of institutional abuse here in the United States. We've talked about it on Good Doctors Diagnose. We've had a special hot-ish take with a survivor of, in fact, the same school that Paris was sent to, Provo Canyon School. And so we were like, we need a couple things to fill this place. Let's do This is Paris. So we did, and it was a lot. This is basically follows a year in the life of Paris Hilton in 6 to 9 months in 2019, where she's starting to make this documentary. At the outset of the documentary, it does not appear that it is going to end up dealing with her experiences at Provo Canyon School, but as so often happens, as she is reflecting on herself and who she is and who she wants to be, all of this trauma comes up. And, you know, we have a lot to get into, so I won't say anything more except we just looked at each other at the end of this and we were like, cool, so Paris Hilton's been in a trauma response for the last 22 years of her life. And everything she's done in front of the public eye has been a trauma response. And we were like, okay, we just need to rewrite our entire narrative of this woman in our heads. No big deal, we'll be back. So this documentary just had so much of interest for us in it. Dr. Kristen, pick a feature.
Okay, so let's talk about some categories that we can cover here.
That's a good idea. I think, yeah, structure.
Okay, so let's talk about the simple life era.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the sex tape.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about her business savvy,
mm-hmm.
including the DJing. And then let's talk about Provo Canyon.
Okay. All right. I'm with you.
So the first one, let's talk about the simple life of it all. So we'll get into Provo Canyon and kind of what it meant and everything else that it meant in a little bit. But what I want to bring up at this point is the statement, my mom just wanted me to be a Hilton and I just wanted to be Paris.
Yeah.
and that she was sent away to this place that we'll cover in a few minutes when she was like 15. Yeah. So when you think of The Simple Life, that is entirely a performance.
Yeah, because she went immediately from her release from Provo Canyon School when she was 18, and the first thing she did was The Simple Life.
And it was part of her grand plan to make herself, on her own name and her own self, $1 million. Because at that point, she tells us, at that point, she thought if she had $1 million, no one else could ever control her.
Yeah.
And so the quickest way to do that was to be the person that everyone already assumed that she was. And so we get The Simple Life. That is absolutely when I started judging her.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember talking and saying, like, oh, she's either the smartest person we've known or she's that dumb.
Yeah.
And it turns out she's the smartest person we've ever known. She just kept working.
Yeah.
And it's a trauma response. So that's it I need to say about The Simple Life. Like, we don't need to get into it. I didn't watch it, did you?
I didn't watch it, no, but I certainly saw the, like, cultural discourse around it. Because this was around the same time that we were getting... Flip Me was Jessica Simpson and Nick Lachey's show. Newlyweds or whatever.
Chicken of the Sea.
Yeah, exactly. And it's definitely around the time, like, that I remember being aware of who she was as a celebrity. And the one thing I'll say the documentary does really well is provide a lot of context for how she existed within her family. And, like, the quote that you brought up, that her mother always wanted her to be a Hilton and she just wanted to be Paris, was so important. But we get so much archival footage of Paris growing up. And, you know, she was born at a time, she's 2 years older than us. So she's just turned 40 there last year. And, or 2 years ago. And last year is 2021. Oh, I have no idea what year it is. Never mind me. I was like, last year was 2020. Pandemic brain. So she just turned 40. So she grew up in the 80s with her father and a video camera, which, like, I grew up in the 80s with my father and a video camera, and he was obsessed with, like, home videos. It's just that Paris Hilton's dad was obsessed with, and he's Paris Hilton's dad.
And he's a Hilton.
And he's a Hilton.
Which let me pause here and say it's her so the founder of the Hilton hotels is Conrad Hilton, who is her great grandfather. So just to understand that, she's like, that's the generation down.
And we get insight really early on that, like, I mean, that certainly the public persona that we had of her and that she perpetuated was of, like, a spoiled rich kid who doesn't understand, you know, hard work and dedication and all this kind of stuff. But we actually learned really early on in the documentary that her dad was, like, the second tier of Hilton children, and they weren't given as much wealth and privilege by their father and grandfather as the, like, first 5 kids or whatever. There's a bazillion Hilton kids. So her parents were always working, so she had a real strong work ethic from her parents from a very early age. They were very wealthy working parents. So she did grow up in, like, exceptional privilege and wealth. But
nothing like she has now.
But nothing like she has now. Yeah, and you see so early on from these videos the performative nature of her. And, like, how she was always asked to perform, told she was beautiful, told she was going to be, like, Marlene Dietrich and, like, all of these wonderful, great women from Hollywood. And the nickname they had for her was Star. They didn't call her Paris, they called her Star. So, like, the psychological impact of that is that whenever she saw a camera, she thought she had to perform, and she did not know how to be authentically herself. And she says that really early on in the documentary as she's talking about this. She says, I've been playing this character for so long, I don't know how to be normal.
And I think the story behind this documentary is that she didn't realize that she was in trauma until she was making this.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not, like, that's why it's structured the way that it's structured.
Yeah.
She didn't set out to tell us about Provo Canyon because she didn't know until the end that she needed to go to Provo Canyon. Needed to emotionally go to that place. she didn't need to go there at all, but to the physical location. So, but we're opened with that she's had nightmares.
Yeah, every day.
Every night. She sleeps for maybe 3-4 hours a night at most. She's had them every night for 20 odd years. And this would be a good place to pause, because before we talk about the sex tape, I think I want to talk about Provo Canyon and what we learned about that, because that gives a lot of context for the sex tape, I think.
Yeah.
So, for everyone who doesn't know Provo Canyon School is not a school. It is a jail that parents pay to send their kids to for offenses as shallow as misbehaving, whatever the definition of the parents is. We learn as well that it is not the only institution that Kathy Hilton sent her daughter to. Kathy of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills fame. Kathy sent her to a wilderness school, wilderness program.
Like 4 wilderness schools, and she just kept escaping from them. So they sent her to a school she couldn't escape from.
What we learned from our Hottish Take with Sasha Oates, the brave and wonderful, incredible friend of the channel, is that essentially, and we learned this a little bit from Paris, but Sasha went into even more detail that I know for me colored a little bit of what Paris was able to share in the documentary. I mean, it was corporal punishment.
Yeah.
They would have to sit and stare at walls for hours. School was a joke. It was entirely about control. Punishment.
Yeah, punishment and control.
And what's important to know is that this industry is still happening. Provo Canyon School is still open.
Still
accepting students.
Yeah, as young as 7 years old.
There is no regulation for this industry. There are, again, we said it in all of our other discussions about this, so I'll say this. There are very, very valid residential treatment programs for teenagers. They are run by licensed therapists. They are paid for by your insurance. When we are talking about the troubled teen industry, we are talking about all of the institutions that exist outside of those two boundaries. So, like, I've known many children, teenagers who went to residential care facilities, all of which were run by licensed clinical therapists. And it was helpful to many of them in a lot of ways, because kids often need something that their parents can't give them. For a lot of us, we have other adults in our lives that can give that to us, but for some people that's not true. And so sometimes going away is not terrible. Being kidnapped in the middle of the night is always terrible. Being locked up and not able to talk to your family is always terrible. Being in solitary confinement for the punishment of hiding your medication that you didn't consent to taking anyway is always terrible. So these children were abused. So Paris was abused at Provo Canyon, and that's the only one she really talks about.
Yeah.
But the ones before that, I mean, we know from our research that they weren't cakewalks.
No. Yeah, and
so
I think
trauma just compounded.
I think the thing that's important to note about, to the distinguish between residential schools that are to help children in need and young adults in need versus the troubled teen industry, is that the troubled teen industry is a series of schools and institutions that is about correcting social deviancy. And that social deviancy is usually defined by the parents or guardians. And as you said, it can range from, like, Paris got sent because she was partying too much and missing high school classes. As Sasha Oates talked about, she got sent for the perceived social deviance of her anxiety and her sexual identity. And so there's a lot of times that children who are queer often get sent to these schools as a way to correct the behavior.
Yeah,
a lot of times it's young people who are having some sort of mental health crisis, children who are in trauma, children who are abused, all of these things. But it's about the perception of correcting a social deviancy. And it comes out of this idea that we learned all about from this, like, weird cult, Synan,
Synanon.
The tough love mode of kind of control and punishment and treating young people with like, oh, we'll fix it by tough love. So that's the impetus for where all of these come from and their guiding kind of ideology in terms of how they view treatment. And so, yeah, then you get things like solitary confinement and forced medication, and they just become breeding grounds for physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And it's just a terrible, terrible place to ever send a child. And that's where Paris Hilton spent the years of her life from 16 to 18. So
what's important to note here is that the what they sell to parents, though, is that none of that ever happens.
Oh, yeah.
And so Paris actually tells her mother the truth for the first time in this documentary. And you can see that Kathy is deeply affected by this.
Yeah.
Because what's important is that these schools prey upon parents' fear for their kids. Mm-hmm. And they tell them, they validate those fears, and they say, you're totally right to be concerned, and we'll fix everything. And they don't, it's all done in secret. So whereas Paris and other students might perceive that their parents knew what was going on and chose not to come get them, the truth is their parents had no idea. And Kathy even says that. She goes, if I had any idea, I would have barreled down the door. And Paris says something to the effect of, I know that now.
Yeah.
Like, I realize that now. And I think that that's really important for this, for what we're going to talk about the next couple chapters of her life. Because what it did was completely break trust for her with everyone.
Yeah.
She could trust no one. And so then, if you know anything about humans, we continually set up our own self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah.
So she couldn't trust anyone, and she kept choosing to do life with people who were not trustworthy. Mm-hmm. So she could keep reconfirming that.
Her worldview. Yeah.
Her worldview. Like her boyfriend when she was 18. Mm. Who I am not even going to name because he does not honestly deserve it.
Nope.
But what he did was create a sex tape of the two of them, and he released it. And what I remember being told by the media is that this was all her fault, and that she was dirty for making it.
Yeah, this is what happens when you're like a promiscuous, unruly, rule-breaking child. Spoiled rich girl. This is what happens.
Spoiled little rich girl. And I didn't think much of it, except it just kind of confirmed the rest of the narrative everyone was trying to tell me about Paris Hilton, which is that she wasn't worth my time.
Sure. Yeah. Same.
And what we know now is that she refers to it as being electronically raped.
Yeah, because she was coerced into the filming and never consented to its distribution. Ever.
And I mean, like, it's not revenge porn. Like, he did it to make money, really clearly, as you see from some other clips. But I am increasingly grateful that sexting was not ever part of my life. Because,
oh my God, me too. Especially before I was fully cooked. Lord, 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 the choices I would have made.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted so desperately to be loved. If someone had said, you do this and I will love you, I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know what I would have done. I don't even want to know.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't fully cooked and I had no concept, an honest concept about myself and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
But what really shattered me was that it wasn't just her, it was her whole family. Mm-hmm. But because they had broken trust as a family, they didn't really rally behind Paris because they couldn't. They didn't have the tools to. She had already become the girl that they wanted her to be, i.e. the troublemaker and the partier and everything else. And so I have a feeling if it came out now and knowing them now and the very close relationship I think they're building now, it looks like at the end of the documentary, there would be a different reaction.
Yeah.
But at the time, it really appears like Paris was left to emotionally handle the fallout on her own. Which she did. Because that's what she does. She deals with it. And by dealing with it, we mean not dealing with it at all.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's so valuable to kind of peel back the layers of this and to understand, you know, and you hinted to it that she was kidnapped in the middle of the night. But that's one of the recurring, she has two recurring dreams. One is from when she was kidnapped and taken to Provo Canyon School. And it's really important to say that her parents were present.
Yes. Sometimes they are not.
During this kidnapping, they were there because they were told by the people at Provo Canyon, this is what is best, this is how it needs to happen. They thought they were doing what was best for Paris, all of those things. But that was the first real break of trust.
Yep.
Was she was crying and screaming and struggling as a person would who was kidnapped from their bed in the middle of the night. And she remembers her parents standing at the end of the hallway, like, crying, but not stopping it. And so, you know, there's a lot of reasons she gets into on why she doesn't tell her parents about the abuse from Provo Canyon School, both from her own mental anxiety and from how she was threatened by the people at the school not to disclose. But when that is, like, such a severe breach of trust.
Yeah.
That she could not disclose what happened to her. And then all they see is this public persona that is, again, confirming their perspective on who their daughter is. Yeah, she was left utterly to her own devices, which led her to a series of abusive relationships, which is totally common for people who are abused.
Yep. That arguably continued until the man she's married to right now.
Hopefully, yeah. I know.
Fingers crossed. But it definitely continued through this documentary because the man that she was dating in this one was a treasure.
Was an abusive piece of dung. Yeah. And so there's that element where she has, like, these real deep-seated trust issues. She doesn't know what it means to be authentically herself around people, and she doesn't trust that she can. And so she's stuck in this weird limbo of, like, why do people want to be around me? Is it because of this persona? Is it because of my wealth? And, like, it's so
it's like the only love she trusts is what she gets from her fans.
Yeah.
She
and,
can't
like,
trust anything else.
The thing that, like, that just kind of shocked me really at the kind of near the start is that she's introducing that she has no, like, authentic self-concept. She's walking into a room for the documentarians, and her, like, one of her best friends in real life is, like, helping with the documentary, and so she's there, and Paris walks into the room, and she's like, no, Paris, really walk into the room. And Paris, like, turns around and she makes a joke, and she's like, what, you mean this isn't a runway? But, like, she sees a camera, she performs. Because that's how literally she was trained by her family. And then that's also how she convinced herself that she was ever going to get any love and acceptance, was performing this identity for folks. And then she I think the thing that I want to talk about real quick next is a lot of people say that Paris is, like, the first influencer.
Mm-hmm. And I think she is, yeah.
I think she is. And that she's responsible, whether intentionally or, like, the kind of ripple effects of her actions, for the creation of the social media kind of crazy culture that we have today. Like, we see the explosion of paparazzi and the harassment of paparazzo photographers comes out of the coverage of Paris Hilton. And, you know, Britney Spears at this time, we talked about it, and now Taylor Swift has to deal with it and kind of the way these young women are treated. But she, like, kind of crafted that herself, and she has an awareness of it.
Yep.
Deeply. And she feels pretty effing horrible about it.
Yeah. And anyone who wants to argue with me that it was intentional, please watch this, because someone in trauma cannot intentionally create this many ripple effects.
Yeah.
Like, no, she was just trying to manage herself. That's it.
And what were they saying? Like, at one point, one of the paparazzi, like, one paparazzo who's now, like, her personal bodyguard or something, I don't know what he is, but he said, you know, he was responsible for creating, like, one of the biggest paparazzi firms at the time in Los Angeles, and photographs of her would go for, like, $1 million.
I don't have a box for that.
And he said, you know, what do you think these people will do to get $1 million? And so now, not only does she have these, like, trust issues from the abuse at Provo Canyon School. She has deep fear and social anxiety around crowds of people because she was literally in the midst of physical altercations with paparazzi for 10 years of her life. And I was like, girl, get a bath and a therapist, please.
So then we find out that nightclubs became like where she really found herself. And I was like, of course the dark is where you find yourself. Like,
yeah, and
of course it is.
Yeah, and she talks about, and we get to see, she is, which was news to me,
and myself.
One of the world's most sought after, highly paid, and renowned DJs.
Amazing.
Why did no one want to tell me this story? Because I want the documentary on Paris Hilton, the DJ, please. She looks amazing at it from what we get to see, but you totally understand why she gravitated towards nightclubs and towards the DJ stand. Because she got to be around people, but the DJ stand gave her separation and protection.
And control.
As we said at the start of this, everything this woman has done for the last 22 years is a trauma response.
The strongest quote to me says, at one point towards the end of the documentary, she says, anything that tries to control me cannot happen. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that makes a very lonely life.
Yeah.
Because there are times that love appears like control if you don't know what it is. Like, I remember when John and I first started dating, I would get really, like, when he would want to know what I was doing. And I perceived it as, like, him trying to, like, micromanage me. Mm-hmm. And my mother very gently went, no, he's just genuinely interested in who you are as a person. And
he's trying to get to know you.
Would like to know what your days look like. And I was like, oh, I'm overreacting. She goes, just a little. And so that's one of the, if I was Paris, I would have dumped him immediately. John's one of the best things that ever happened to me. So, and that's, like, she has dated, like, not great dudes. No. But one of those is you can't let anyone get close.
Yeah.
Because the minute they ask a question that may seem like control, it has to go.
Yeah, and that's, she says from the outset that she once she left Provo Canyon School, like, the reason she was able to leave, we should say, is because she aged out of it. She turned 18, and they could no longer keep her.
Yeah.
So she checked herself out of Provo Canyon School, and that's where she started this goal to be worth and to make $1 billion. Because that was what she thought she needed so that no one would ever control her again. Her parents, her relationships, schools, whatever. And so we get to see that through her, like, incredibly keen business mind and entrepreneurial drive.
Holy cow. Yep.
She has, like, 12 different companies, beauty lines, fashion lines. She's DJing. She's an influencer, whatever. She's exceptionally bright. She has a great economic mind, and a real understanding of, like, business and marketing and all that kind of stuff. But for me, I think, we've, unless you have anything else to say about pre-trauma.
No, then I want to get into when she meets everybody at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. So we start the documentary in October of 2019, and then we backtrack 6 months earlier. So by October of 2019, she has realized that these nightmares that she has, that are then documented by, like, her insomnia is documented by the documentarian. So she's kind of, like, living through what her life looks like as well. She starts to talk to her sister, Nikki, who seems like just a general badass, about her memories, and tells Nikki what happened to her at Provo Canyon School. And it starts to stir up all of these memories. And she eventually reaches out to, she says, she had done a lot of research on Provo Canyon School for, like, the last couple of years leading up to this. But she hadn't really taken the step to, like, reach out and find out what other people were doing. And this journey for those 6 months of this documentary kind of prompted her to do that. And she reaches out to a survivor who was at Provo Canyon School at the same time as her, a friend of hers, who now has set up a network of survivors of the troubled teen industry in Provo Canyon School. And so Paris invites her over to her house, and this woman has, like, all the deets on the school and, connections to all these people that Paris knew back then, and starts to tell her about Breaking Code Silence, which we've covered in previous iterations of our discussion of this, which is a movement to bring awareness to these schools and to get them regulated by the federal government and by state governments. So the last like half hour of this documentary is her meeting with these survivors as well. The girl who was her roommate, the girl who was her best friend, and the 5 of them, I think, sitting around at Paris's talking as they get ready to do an Instagram awareness activity. Campaign, thank you. Couldn't find the word. On breaking code silence and on their experiences at Provo Canyon School. And God love her. That's the first time in her life she realized she wasn't alone. And that these girls had trauma too, and that they didn't sleep, and they had nightmares, and they had trust issues. And you see her start to realize that her whole life since that she left that school has been a trauma response. And she gets so overwhelmed she has to go upstairs. And like
to the closet of her stuff given to her by people who love her.
And like that was another tangentially fascinating thing for me. That girl has so much shit she doesn't even know. But she can't, like, psychologically, she cannot get rid of any of it because she was stripped of all her belongings by Provo Canyon. So she's like, I don't need any of this stuff. She's like, I don't use it. I don't even know what's in this closet. She's like, but I can't give it away. And I was like, please go to a therapist. Please get some trauma-informed care, my dear Paris. But yeah, that was such an impactful scene to see those women and to hear those experiences. And that's what led her to then talk to her mom, Kathy, about it, because she was able to share this campaign and the experience and use it to tell her mom what happened to her. So that turns into Paris the activist, who is the Paris we have seen for the last 2 years. And we've covered other aspects of this where she spoke to the Utah State Senate on a bill there specifically about Provo Canyon School and troubled teen industry. She's campaigned nationally for the Accountability for Congregate Care Act, which is before the House and Senate now, in terms of regulating the industry. She's super vocal about it now, super supportive of other victims and survivors. And it's just, I don't know her, but I'm so proud of her.
Yeah, and I was really, one of my favorite tidbits that came out of that, them all sitting around talking, was how they all knew Simple Life was fake, because part of this story on Simple Life was I've never mopped a floor.
Yeah,
and they were all like, oh girl, like, all right, you've cleaned a dish.
We used to scrub toilets together.
So there's this whole like little subsect of people too that have been rooting for the real Paris for 20 years, and she just found them again.
Yeah, and the other thing
that warmed my little heart.
Oh, I know, the cockles. And the other thing that came out of that was further evidence that she has, like, no self-concept. Because they said, like, yeah, we knew, like, and they were like, oh, and that voice? Like, we knew that wasn't your real voice. And she looks at them and she goes, you mean I didn't have that high pitch to my voice when you guys knew me? And they were like, no, you sound just like you sound now. And, like, so much, we talked about it when we watched it together, so much of what she reveals she doesn't know she's revealing.
Yes.
As she's talking about it, which is the beautiful of, like, self-reflexivity, and, like, hopefully she can watch this back now and, like, it gives her this level of self-concept and self-awareness. But, like, she was just like, you mean I didn't talk like that before? And I was like, oh, girl. I just wanted to hug all of them. And, yeah, for me, it was great that she was able to find those people who knew her. Probably when she wasn't drugged by Provo Canyon, was probably authentically herself with those people.
Yeah, it's probably her sister Nikki and those people.
Yeah. So I'm so delighted that they all found each other again, and that this is what she's choosing to do with her knowledge and her privilege and her power. But y'all, like, we could talk about this for another, like, 45 minutes. We did not anticipate being emotionally devastated and learning this much from This Is Paris.
I didn't anticipate being this emotionally invested in the future of Paris Hilton.
But I mean, did we imagine being this emotionally invested in the future of Britney Spears before 2 years ago?
Or Taylor Swift?
Or Taylor Swift? Like, no.
This is why we do the work that we do.
This is our big sister auntie energy coming through.
Seriously.
For real. Where we're like, we have to protect these girls.
Like, who needs a meal? Who needs a fluffy pillow? Like, what's going on? Like...
Do you want to borrow my Brene Brown book? How can I help you?
Do you just want to sit on the couch and I'll cover you in Irish wool and I'll make you some tea? And
I know. This is like the caregiver in us is like just going to show up at Paris's house and be like, I brought you some tea.
Here's some cookies and some tea.
And a hot water bottle.
And a hot water bottle. I am continually astounded by the capacity of humans to survive utter hell.
Oh my god, yes.
And to thrive in spite of it. Mm-hmm. I thought a lot about, there's a rapper called Bad Barbie who I do not listen to, but she started getting a lot of prominence right around the same time as this documentary came out because she called out Dr. Phil for sending her to Turnabout Ranch, which is a troubled teen industry member.
Oh yeah, we haven't even gotten to the Dr. Phil of all of this. Like, how many kids is he responsible for? Lord.
And he partially owned Turnabout Ranch and sent a lot of kids there. And that I think it appears to me that Bad Barbie is still quite in her trauma, and still processing it out. And so I hope that she has, is able to do that, and is able to find a place of, power and calm that it appears some of the women, in this documentary and some other women and children that we've spoken to have found in their own spaces. Yeah. I know that I have now started following Paris much more closely. And I love that she's a DJ. I don't want to go to any of her shows ever because that's not my jam, but no, I support it so much.
Yep.
And I am just continually grateful that we live in a time where we get to know other humans this easily.
Yeah, and we say this literally almost every time we film something on this channel, but humans don't change through shame and guilt and all of these things. We change through stories and relationships. And this is why we continue to work on our relationships and also through our understanding of other humans through the stories that we engage with. And we are living in a blessed time of content availability for these stories. So we hope that this conversation has enlightened you and sparked your curiosity to go engage with some other stories either around this or an area that interests you. The internet is your oyster. But I think that's all I've got for This is Paris.
Our living resource list for institutional abuse will be in the show notes below. Other things down there include a link to our newsletter, which is a great way to stay in touch with us if you'd like to have some more of these kind of conversations and more resources and more such things. If you enjoyed this video, we'd love for you to hit the thumbs up because the algorithm likes it and therefore we have to. And subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to do that. We'd love to have you around. Comment below with your thoughts, feelings, suggestions, and we can continue this conversation with you in the chat in that way. In the meantime, our deepest hope for you, we try to close these kind of things with our hope in light of what we have just seen. So our hope for you is that you are with someone that you trust and that you trust yourself and that you feel safe in your own skin and in the community and family around you that you have either been given or that you have built. And we hope that at no point in time you have insomnia so badly that some really good chamomile tea can't solve it. We'll see you next week for the beginning of The Dropout.
Woo! Elizabeth Holmes, y'all.
Bringing on Elizabeth Holmes. Or next in the playlist. Or next in somewhere. Wherever we see you next, we're honored you spend your time with us. And we wish you all the best. Bye.
Take care, everybody.